You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. The title of today's show is F1 Shouldn't Be This Late. It's a school night, and that's by Admiral Pride on Twitter. Runner-up, welcome to Miami, the Baku of the Americas. That's from F1 Swift on Twitter. I'm your host, Richard Spanners Ready. Welcome to our Miami Grand Prix race review. And as much as the drivers have complained about the hot and physical conditions in Miami, yeah, it's hard to drive an F1 car in the heat, but could they stand the pressure of podcasting quite late into the night? It's approaching midnight here in the UK, so I've swapped my rum for coffee as we go late into the witching hour. So coming up, we'll discuss whether Verstappen was the difference between the two teams today. What could Ferrari have done differently? We'll ask if Mercedes should change their strategic approach. And we'll ask, what on earth did Aston Martin do to offend Haas today? And has Miami found a place in your F1 heart? We are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed. With the kind permission of our better halves, we aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined in the shed by Matt Trumpets.
And not currently catching up on my sleep with my eyes open.
And racing driver Brad Philpot. Hi, Brad.
Wholeheartedly embracing the American razzmatazz.
Yeah, we'll get deep into whether we think the Miami Grand Prix was a success or not. But I think the place to really start is where the race was won and lost. And I think I'll kick it off this week if you don't mind, Matt. I really do think that this week the race was won and lost by Max Verstappen. The team seemed pretty evenly matched. There's obviously differences between the car. But I think when a driver stands up with a performance like that and is the difference, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, we could argue about it. Verstappen gave the performance needed to win the race. I think Red Bull, the team, continued to be better on the opening stint tire especially. And I think we saw that with Leclerc. But the winning move really for Verstappen, although we could perhaps blame the dirty side of the grid a little bit for Carlos, the winning move was getting past Sainz at the start of the race. That let everything happen. Had he not done that, we could have seen a different outcome.
So why don't we start just sort of setting the scene of what the drivers were dealing with behind the wheel? Even if we go through the top three teams, really, a lot was made of the straight line advantage that the Red Bull had. Clearly, the Ferrari have got a good package. Is it as simple as Red Bull chose a path and have seemed to have chosen a path in previous races that favors straight line speed, and Ferrari are going for like an overall lap time, much in the style of Red Bull during their dominant years? They were rarely, the fastest in the speed trap, or is it something inherent in these cars?
Well, I think it's inherent in the concept of the cars, if that's okay for me to say. Red Bull looked at these regulations, decided to make as much downforce, I think, from their floor as possible, therefore having a minimum drag. And that means that we are going to maximize our into straight speed. And they designed an entire package around that concept. Whereas Ferrari looked, I think, at what Red Bull were doing and chose to have a very neutral car that will work well at a lot of different circuits. Now, we've had some circuits where top line speed has really been important. And I think the DRS zones in particular favored Red Bull when they had that to use. But at the end of the day, it's really, to me, just down to which team on the weekend has a better control of their tire management at the start of the race. And that's been Red Bull. And whether that's down to their concept or just they have nailed the suspension, they have less porpoising or what have you. It's also, I think, important to note that Ferrari hasn't really developed the car yet, whereas Red Bull has brought a lot of development. So we might see at the other end of the season, Ferrari bringing developments that Red Bull has run out of money for. So this is a long game we're playing here.
So in my head there, I was thinking, okay, well, if we go to, say, a track that's got more high-speed corners, say something like, I don't know, Barcelona or Silverstone, then you might see that advantage disappear. And in my head, I was thinking, Brad, if it's a track where, if you go to a track where it's less dependent on DRS overtakes on a long straight, they might lose that advantage. But it is feeling this season like DRS overtakes on long straights really is the key area that you want to be good, because that seems to be dominating this regulation set.
Yeah, part of me wonders though whether maybe our view of the comparative strengths of these two teams is getting slightly skewed because we've seen a couple of pretty similar tracks, which, as you say, have this. They kind of benefit the Red Bull philosophy with these long straights. Had this been a track where those long DRS zones didn't exist and it was a little bit more corner focused, it really looked like the Ferrari was just much, much stronger in those areas. And a lot of tracks on the rest of the calendar, and we've still got a whole lot of tracks to come, seem to me like maybe they will be more suited to the Ferrari. So I don't think we should panic just yet that Red Bull are suddenly going to start running away with it. You know, Leclerc got an early lead in the standings, but now it seems like Verstappen is just super strong. I think maybe the run of races we've had most recently may just be making it look a bit more in Red Bull's favour. Having said that, when I then think about the reliability problems that Max has had so far in the season, and losing out on a lot of points through not finishing early on, it would be looking pretty ominous in terms of Max being quite a clear favourite if it wasn't for that big buffer Leclerc built up. So yeah, but my view is I think maybe the Ferrari looks like I would rather drive the Ferrari than the Red Bull.
Oh, really? That is interesting. Even though Verstappen has won all the races that he's finished, you're still looking ahead at the season and going, oh, mate, I think I'd prefer the Ferrari going forward. So Imola was a track where passing was hard, so having the straight line speed to attack and defend obviously was important. Saudi and this track were pretty similar. You've got Baku coming up that will be similar again, but I'm interested that you'd still want that Ferrari.
I mean, I'd need to look at the whole calendar and really work out which tracks are kind of more straight line, which are more benefited by having a better straight line speed. But in terms of driving, the Ferrari looks nicer to drive. It looks like Leclerc can follow quite easily in the twisty stuff, and it looks like the car, apart from some porpoising, which doesn't tend to really affect them too much, it looks like the more compliant car, but the Red Bull is just so strong on the straights. What were they saying? Was it 10 kilometers per hour difference to the DRS? I mean, you can get away with having a bit of a wooden car through some of the corners as long as it's okay if you've got a massive straight line speed advantage like that. So, you in terms of the driving side, you'd take the one which was nicer through the corners. But over the season, I'm not 100% sure.
Thing is, Matt, when Red Bull had the tyre advantage in the first stint, they were able to overtake and use that advantage and then pull a gap. When it looked like Ferrari had a bit of an advantage on the colder, older, hard tyres, Leclerc couldn't capitalise on it. So strategically, I think I want the Red Bull at the moment.
Well, it's really all about the speed you carry into the turn and the traction you get out of the turn. And I think this is where Red Bull advantage was with being better on the tires, because we saw early days, Leclerc did put a gap into Verstappen, but around about lap 4 or 5. And clearly, I think that was a plan for Ferrari to get as far ahead as possible before DRS really came into play, and then just try and keep him out of range. His right front tire went off. I don't know if it was graining or what, but he made an interesting comment post-race saying that we are really good with tire warm-up, but we struggle especially on the medium tire. And I think that's going to be a nut that Ferrari has to crack in order to be able to make that overtake back that you were discussing.
Okay, so but as much as we're sort of highlighting a tactical advantage Red Bull must have had, I think if we look at how Red Bull got the win, for my money, it's how Verstappen got the win. And see if you disagree with any of these points. Obviously, he got the good start, although didn't we see again the even numbers all getting kind of a bit of a rough start and the odd numbers getting a better start?
I think Perez was the only one out of the top 6 that maintained position on the start.
Right, okay. So that's a thing we can come back to, because I don't love that lottery, but you've still got to get a good start. So you get ahead of Sainz, and then you get and make the overtake on Leclerc as well. And then from that point, flawless, really, management. You could see at certain points he was trying to maintain a gap and being consistent on the lap times where Leclerc wasn't, and able to then pull away. And even towards the end of that stint, go, right, well, we need the gap because, overcut and undercut is unpredictable in this era. Let's go stretch now. Let's go put out fastest laps on that medium tyre. But then I think the real test came when you have that disappointment of losing your lead from the safety car, fending off Leclerc and then really digging deep and breaking the DRS. I don't think, Brad, every driver on the field would have been able to hold that lead with that car advantage.
No, I agree with everything you said. Verstappen won the race, and Perez couldn't make that same impression on the same kind of car that he was chasing. Verstappen decisively took the lead and then controlled it at the front, and there was no point, watching the timing, there was no point I thought his lead was in any danger at all. It never really looked like, despite Leclerc making a few fastest laps or, coming back at him a couple of tenths occasionally, it was only ever a flash in the pan, and then Verstappen would continue to just eat the gap out. And then, like you say, even after the safety car, it was exciting. Yeah. I thought there was a chance maybe Leclerc would get through, but the moment it settled down, there was just this point where it was clear, okay, it's done. The gap's back up to 9 tenths. He's just ticked over past a second now. He's not getting back within the DRS zone, and that's it. And so Verstappen really just took everything that was thrown at him and was just the stronger package. And as you say, it was him that made the difference, because you have Perez in an identical car who couldn't make that same pass with the same straight line speed on. No,
it wasn't. No. All of Mexico's yelling at you. So to fend off any emails, there was a declared power issue with Perez. And actually there was some sort of a sensor that went wrong, and they said, they had to disable that sensor to get it back up and running. But even in the first stint, I think it was clear that he wasn't breezing by Sainz in the same way that Verstappen was able to breeze by on the straights past Leclerc.
No, you're right. No, I'm doing Perez a disservice there, because I forgot he had this reported, was it 27-ish horsepower deficit after he had the power problem. Because the gap didn't really change so much after that, because it seemed to kind of be, although he lost the time, the gap between Sainz and Perez seemed to stay the same. I kind of forgot that he had this power deficit, and we still don't know that for sure. That's what we were told. But yeah, you're right. He was really done over by that loss of power. Although his engineer didn't really believe him. Oh no, you've just lost the toe. I've just lost the toe 7 seconds in a lap and a half. I don't think so.
Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, I think the data might have been lagging off the car a little bit to his race engineer, because it was very obvious if you looked at the lap time after he complained about it that he lost a bucket load of time. But
we should remember, just to defend Perez's engineer as well, that we hear those radio messages late. So when he made that call of, you just lost the toe, it might not have been as obvious to us looking at the timing screens, Brad.
I just have to point out, this is really funny, because last night I was out to dinner with a few race drivers in Brackley, actually, about 30 seconds walk from the Mercedes factory.
Nice flex.
And we were there because one of my friends is coaching a GB3 driver, which is essentially like British Formula 3. And he had an issue with his car at Silverstone yesterday, where he was losing performance on the straight compared to his teammate. And the first thing the engineer was saying was, it is a driving problem. There's something you're not doing right. And it took him proving it on the data that it definitely wasn't a driver issue. It was definitely a car performance thing. And it tickles me, because obviously the engineer's first thought is, the driver's talking rubbish. There can't be anything wrong with the car. It must be the bit of meat behind the steering wheel. And I love it's always the same.
I love that even at the top level, we're now talking about Formula One, those relationships still kind of exist. I'll tell you the other area that Verstappen impressed me as well was coming out on the hard tyres. So I was glued to the timing screens because, the race wasn't exactly popping at this point. So I was watching it on the timing screens, and Leclerc took a little bit of time to get those hards activated. And if you look at Russell's timings at the beginning, see, Matt, I'm in your zone here. I'm in the tyre zone. Russell took a while to build up the hard tyre temperature and pace. Hamilton went through like a graining phase where he had a couple of laps, 2 or 3 seconds slower. Verstappen was straight on the pace. And whilst I was kind of looking at that, hoping, because I'm not a Verstappen fan, I was looking at Leclerc's times going, all right, that's building up. Maybe Ferrari will be better on the harder tyre. Verstappen was just bang on. I think the lap after the outlap, he was straight into the same kind of times. And I went, well, this is it. He's in control now. It's over. But I don't think everyone was as good on the cold hards.
No, they weren't. And I think, for Mercedes, we heard this at Imola as well, talking to Hamilton, having to keep his hard tire temperatures down around 104 C. And then after a couple of laps, they're like, okay, you can bring them up now because we've worn enough tread off that some of the heat's going to bleed off down the straights. Well, they already learned that lesson with Russell. And if you recall, when Hamilton exited the pits, he was, I think, fighting with Ricciardo, trying to stay ahead of him. So he pushed them hard right out of the gate. And then he suffered a penance for that, having to sit on them and not overheat them while enough tread wore off to where he could push them again. Ferrari, I don't know, hard tire times, to me, they were pretty identically matched. Red Bull might have had the advantage directly out of the pit lane, but listening to them talk in the cool-down room after the race, their times were, they were trading tenths. They were just nicking tenths out of each other back and forth. And it was tantalizing to watch, especially once the safety car brought them back together. But the damage, as you rightly point out, was all done at the beginning of the race on the medium tire. And it's down to Red Bull, the car, and Verstappen, the driver. Absolutely.
And I guess the other final obstacle, Brad, for Verstappen is losing that hard-won lead. When it is tit for tat on the hards, you've earned your advantage. And in fact, this is the other thing. I think I did mention it was the consistency. So we're leaking a little bit into Ferrari here, but Verstappen was setting consistent times on the mediums, and unless he wanted to go for a push lap and build up some lead. Leclerc was making a lot of mistakes. So he would suddenly have a lap that was a second down, 2 tenths here, 4 tenths. And it wasn't like the core pace. It was the consistency of that pace as well.
Yeah, and I actually noticed a few drivers having similar off laps to Leclerc there. Hamilton certainly had it a few times in his chase of Bottas. And I saw other drivers who you'd make a small mistake and they were 6 tenths to a second down on that lap. This track seemed to really punish you making a small error. So it makes it all the more impressive that Verstappen was able to eke that gap out with a car that we've already admitted that isn't potentially quite as nice to drive through some of the corners, through some of the fast, medium speed corners, and still just consistently eke that gap out. And obviously once that gap is taken away with the safety car, although you could have identical tyre life in terms of number of laps to your competitor, and I can't remember what the laps difference was between Verstappen's tyres and Leclerc's, but the fact that you've managed to eke that gap out, you've spent some of your tyre to do that, and so you are then at a disadvantage when the race is restarted and the gap's neutralised. The fact that you've pulled out 7 seconds or whatever on your competitor, you are then at a disadvantage because you've taken that little bit more tyre life out, and it's not really, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just part of racing. But for that driver, for Verstappen in that case, it's not a completely fair fight. You've not got the benefit of that tyre life that you've spent anymore.
And that's why you rarely see people doing what Schumacher used to do and what Vettel used to do, where Schumacher would just go as fast as possible and lap the entire field, and Vettel would pull out, basically he would go for a free pit stop gap, say in 2013 when he was dominating. When Mercedes were dominating, you didn't see them do that anymore. And I think that's probably partly down to the fact that we've had an increased amount of safety cars. Safety's a good thing, but they do reach for that safety car awfully quickly, and we'll get to the safety car stuff a little bit later. But I think here we're talking about Verstappen versus Leclerc, and that seems to be the title fight right now. And this feels like a really clear indication that you've got Max Verstappen as a mature title contender, a veteran of that 2021 campaign, and then you look across at the Ferrari garage and you've got a team that's not used to fighting for championships in recent history, and you've got Leclerc, who is clearly a massive talent, but then you go, right, is he a seasoned championship contender? And a race like this, that first stint, Red Bull and Verstappen were on it in every single way. But with Ferrari and Leclerc, the core performance was there, but it was just death by 1,000 cuts, a little bit here, a little bit there. And that could be the difference this season.
Yeah, but I'm slightly less inclined to say that it's Leclerc the driver, and I'm more slightly inclined to say that it's the Ferrari ability on that medium tire is just putting him over the edge into that margin where I can do one lap at that, but then the next lap I'm going to make a mistake. And those mistakes, we saw a huge one. In fact, didn't he lose like a second or more going into turn, was it 11?
It was the pushy left-hander where a lot of cars seem to be struggling to get the bite in.
Yeah, he was chasing Verstappen and almost in DRS and hanging in there. And then he went to turn in and the car just said, nope, sorry, done with that for a while. I'm going to take a nap. And oof, man. Yeah, you could see. And he said the car was not fun to drive. And I think Red Bull have the balance advantage right now. They understand how to balance the car better and how to balance the tires slightly better than Ferrari.
Okay, so let's play virtual Ferrari manager for a little while. Is there anything Ferrari could have done? I think, safety car aside, looking at that first stint where Red Bull were just eking out the gap through consistency and performance and building up, a 7-second gap going into the first pit stop, they told Sainz, right, we're going as long as possible, and Leclerc was plan D, whatever that is. I love Ferrari with their plans, by the way. Like, yeah, that is plan 17. Their meetings must be so long of what they're going to do. Is there anything they could have done, Brad? Would you... Is it worth it? We're always like screaming at the TV. Bolt some softs on, move yourself in the grid, shake it up, do something. But really, the reality is, in a kind of one-stop type race like that, is there a lot they can do?
Personally, I don't think so. I think once the position was lost at the start, and it was clear that Leclerc couldn't hang on, very closely to the back of Verstappen, I think they just did what they could. I think that the race was always going to play out exactly as it did. So unless Matt's got some potential other strategy option, was there a two-stop there that would have maybe forced Red Bull's hand?
Because it didn't look, Matt, like there was a huge amount of tyre saving particularly going on. It looked like both Ferraris were pretty much pushing, trying to keep up.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Actually, if I look at the Ferrari timings, what interested me most about this, and you can just go to sleep now if this doesn't interest you, because I'm going to be here a while, I promise, was that Sainz never ran the kind of fastest lap times that Leclerc did, but that but at lap 20 he was still maybe 4 seconds off the back of him. So I think again, and then Leclerc went faster on those worn medium tires, and I just wonder. I'm thinking about the Mercedes experience with the hards. I wonder if they just have some temperature issues. And then once enough tread is gone, they can start to push on that tire again. And this may be what we're seeing.
That's really interesting. That wasn't how I was reading it. I was reading it as Leclerc kind of trying to catch up, but lots of mistakes creeping in, almost like he was just driving beyond himself a little bit. That's why I got the impression that he was really pushing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure he was pushing looking at those lap times. But what was clear was that Red Bull had him covered the whole time.
Yeah, and this is it. When a team's in the lead like that, you don't always know whether they are pushing or whether they're managing a gap. And like Brad says, when you've got like a 5-7 second gap, you have to really think, is it worth pushing and getting a 20-second gap when all that could be taken away from me in the click of a safety car?
Yeah. But why take more chances than you have to?
But that does, unfortunately, Matt, bring us to Carlos Sainz, because you've pointed out there he didn't have the race pace. Now, for context, Matt, big Carlos Sainz fan. So as quickly as I jumped to Perez's defense when Brad so incorrectly didn't talk about his massive engine deficit, a normal driver would have retired. But Checo, he wrestled it to 4th place. I know you're a big Carlos Sainz fan, Matt, and we were kind of arguing on... Was it FP2 that he had the shunt, and that robbed him of kind of, and me and Chris were kind of going at you a bit, saying, this is starting to become a little bit of an issue. He's starting to drop it in races. He's dropping it in practice sessions. It's becoming a little bit of a trend. And here, the main penalty, although he recovered in qualifying, was a lack of race running. And maybe that's why he never had the pace in the race.
No, well, you could point to that, or you could point to the one thing that I didn't really consider because I was just thinking about how much track running he needed to be competitive on the day, was the fact that he actually sustained some injuries when he crashed his car and was still driving with them on Sunday. He was at pains to point out, yes, I have some injuries today. Thank you very much, concrete barrier that I think should be a tech pro.
So he also bashed his head jumping from off track, like just through a little hole in the fence, cracked his head, and that was just before he then went on to have that accident as well.
Yeah, I saw the video of that. Those things are a lot smaller than you think they are, having seen them in real life.
Okay, so Brad, clearly Sainz is cursed.
Yeah, he had a bit of a nightmare in terms of like minor head injury, which I don't know whether that was the thing that affected him, but it definitely doesn't help. And I was wondering whether or not he was just in pain putting the helmet on, because he had quite a nasty cut under his lovely long dark hair.
His beautiful,
it was bleeding down his
long
face. But yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a trend now, aren't we? It's not just the mistakes where he's spun Melbourne and he crashed in the practice today. It's not just those kind of mistakes. Obviously, Imola wasn't really his fault at the start, but he's generally always the one behind in the sessions that count.
Yeah.
He seems to be able to pull out a fast lap and look like there's promise of matching Leclerc in some of the practice sessions and even in some of the qualifying sessions. But it seems that when it counts, he is now consistently... We've got quite a few data points now.
Yeah.
And it's always, in the same way that it's always Perez behind Verstappen, it's always Sainz behind Leclerc, Ferrari at the moment. And I think that's potentially how it's going to settle in now.
That's a possibility. I mean, I would never have argued on raw pace that Sainz was quicker than Leclerc. Where he has won the race is he has been able to be consistent where Leclerc hasn't, and that seems to have deserted him. Not always his fault. I mean, certainly, getting tagged at the start of Imola was you can't blame him for that. But what I see is after 20 laps, if you're 4 seconds back, you're not really that far off in Formula One terms. We've certainly seen bigger discrepancies between teammates. And if he's not yet feeling 100% with a car, or if he's, suffering from injuries, then that certainly falls into a window that I would be like, well, okay, he may not be the fastest fast lap, but he might still yet out consistent Leclerc.
I just think if you're going to have any chance of beating Red Bull this year, any chance of beating the Verstappen Red Bull, you need to be operating on a Leclerc pace level. You don't have time to spend 10 races getting into it because Verstappen's going to be so far down the road. So I think Sainz is making his own, I was going to say decisions. He's not deciding to not be quite fast enough, but it's Leclerc is taking the initiative and has worked it out and is quick enough to, he's leading the championship, but to give Verstappen some trouble whilst Verstappen is the quickest and is winning these races. And Sainz, if Sainz was the lead driver and they had a second driver slower than Sainz, Ferrari wouldn't be looking that strong right now.
I mean, I think that's a fair point. And also the two Ferrari drivers had to very quickly tussle for who had the right to be the one bringing the fight to Verstappen. I think that is very clearly Leclerc now. If you're Ferrari, you would have to be backing Leclerc as your number one driver. And, we're talking about, there's Leclerc with the pace and Sainz with the consistency. Well, bad luck because Verstappen's got the pace and the consistency. So you need to sort that out. Which one of those two is easier to kind of fix from a Ferrari point of view? Which one do you take forward in the battle against the Red Bull? I think you're going to go with Leclerc and work on, right, let's get some consistency on there. Let's find, a place where you're comfortable. But there's clearly a teammate battle between Leclerc and Sainz. Leclerc plays some lovely little mind games. He gets pole but he probably sees, I don't know if he can see on the timing screens, that he's only got pole by, 2.5 seconds. So Sainz is 2.5 tenths. So Sainz is close to him. Leclerc comes on the radio straight away. It's not a perfect lap, that. Not a perfect lap, but I guess it got the job done. And I felt, Brad, from a driver point of view, that was a dig. That's a kind of a dig at Sainz. I'm probably reading too much into it, but it's little things like that drivers say over the radio to go, well, I would have beaten him by more. So he was even upset it was close.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wasn't that close, though, was it? Wasn't Sainz over 2 tenths behind in qualifying?
Yeah, but the problem is, because Sainz is popular, the bar gets a little bit lower for what constitutes success coming from behind. So a lot of the commentary and a lot of the comment in social media was, within 2.5 tenths, which is a little bit damning with faint praise.
Yeah, I mean, 2.5 tenths isn't dramatic, but there are plenty of races where a couple of cars can slot into that gap and you can be fourth quite easily. So I don't think Sainz had an amazing qualifying in that respect, but he also was trying to recover from a loss of confidence from having lost the rear of the car when he wasn't expecting it to happen again. The same as Imola, where he lost it when he wasn't expecting to. So it was actually probably quite a good performance considering that, because it's quite hard to come back when you're trying to drive. I mean, I've obviously never driven Formula One car, but it's difficult to extract maximum pace out of a car when it's done a thing you didn't expect, and you might not 100% understand why, and you weren't able to catch it to the point where you actually had a painful crash. And yeah, you're always just gonna be worried that that's going to happen again, so you won't quite lean on it as hard. So yeah. Anyway, so I'm not trying to get on Carlos Sainz's case. I think he's doing pretty solidly, and maybe his luck is going to change quite soon. And there's going to be races where he will be the quicker of the two Ferrari drivers. I just get the feeling that the trend is in one direction.
It certainly looks that way right now. I just want to make the small Sainz-friendly point that he did manage to beat Verstappen's banker time. And that's not a nothing, given where he set the bar. Because Leclerc didn't beat him the first time out either, did he?
No, and but Verstappen, he was doing really well until lap 5, and until lap 5, I would say that was one of the greatest ever qualifying laps of all time, Brad. Until turn 5, he was doing really well. That is not a dig at Verstappen. That is a dig at all the pundits who are fawning over his 2021 Saudi Arabia lap, where he binned it into the wall at the final turn. But I think Miami should come under the microscope next. All right. Well, what did we think of it? I had a brief chat with the guys here about what they thought about the Miami race circuit and the Miami event. And one of us is coming down on a more negative side. And that's me. But my two panelists here have come down on a positive side. So, Brad, what did you think of the Miami Grand Prix racetrack and event?
Well, Matt doesn't count because it's one of his home events.
Yeah, exactly.
So
he's biased.
His opinion is going to be massively biased. But so I'm definitely guilty of in the past not really buying into the American style of sporting event, the kind of t-shirt cannons and big hype. But I embraced this one. I thought, you know what? Everybody seems to be really getting into this. We're having a massive build-up. There's a lot of people really excited. So I'm just going to kind of go with the flow with that and really kind of soak up all the media attention that this event is getting. And so I paid a lot of attention. I tried to watch all of the content that came out this weekend. I watched the W Series races. I was trying to watch everything to do with this event and even try and understand who some of the celebrities were. And I think I even knew a couple more than Martin Brundle did, judging by that grid walk.
That was horrible. And, good on him, but that was horrible.
And I enjoyed it. I thought the track layout was much more conducive to racing than I first expected. I thought we had quite a lot of overtakes. I know some of this is obviously down to strategy, but Russell managed to come through quite a long way through the pack. There were opportunities to pass that were not available at Imola. And I know we can probably argue that that's partly because Imola was damp offline, so it's harder to overtake anyway. But regardless, you could overtake at this track if the situation was
I'm
right.
worried about you using Imola as the bar for overtaking. Imola, which is a track that has sneaked back in under the pandemic as an emergency measure, had a decent wet race, and now everybody thinks we should be at Imola forever. I mean, that shouldn't be the bar for whether it's a good race or not.
Yeah, okay, I guess so. It's just because that's the most recent thing, in my memory. But I just thought that it was possible to overtake. And I've watched Formula One for enough years to see races where it's impossible to overtake. So I quite enjoyed the layout. I enjoyed the excitement. I enjoyed the colours. I didn't hate the pretend harbour.
No.
I quite enjoyed that too, in the same way that you have themed areas at a theme park. I don't really think the old mine shaft ride at Disneyland is a real mine shaft. It doesn't have to be real. It's a theme. It's they're kind of going with this kind of seaside bright blue kind of theme. And I also heard they were selling, it's like a yacht sales place. They were selling some of those yachts. It's kind of, I thought they did it well, and I enjoyed it, and especially in the kind of, given the space constraints they had. The only thing that fell flat for me was the race just didn't happen to ignite. We were lucky we had the safety car, but as an event, I enjoyed the whole weekend, and I watched every session, and I think I watched every lap of every session, and I had a good time.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, but I liked the track. I liked the tight, twisty go-kart bits. It was a lot of fun to see the drivers go through there, and I like the errors that the track generated amongst the drivers in the race and in qualifying. It seemed like it was a pretty challenging track to get around. But I'll tell you the thing that really grabbed my attention was that I looked at the race about lap 37 and I thought, no one's been lapped. But then Latifi got lapped. So I was like, okay, Latifi's been lapped. But I think he might have been the only car that was lapped before the safety car. And I said, oh, well, it must all be DRS trains, right? No, I mean, either everyone's just like, oh, I'm just going to sit 2 seconds behind everybody else, lap after lap after lap. Or there was something about this track that simply kept the leaders. And this is what made it kind of interesting. It kept the leaders from getting anyone really clear of their pit windows for the longest of times. And that is going to wind up creating some very interesting results, I think, if we continue to come back here.
Oh, no. So you two are being super positive. Now I'm gonna seem like the grumpy one. And I don't have any objection to the razzmatazz or anything like that. My lad had missed all the build up to it. And at about lap 40, he went, hang on, is that fake water? So, for someone who missed all the hype and the complaining about it, he only noticed right at the end. It's like, yeah. And he just went like, why? And I went like, well, I guess they thought it would look cool, and maybe it does. My problem is that this is just another street track, and by street track, I guess I mean a temporary circuit. It's got another use, and they've put it up for this race. They've done a good job for a street track, but call me weird. I like racing on racetracks, and I don't think. I think these cars are designed for racing on racetracks, and when you go on a street track, it's always a compromise. So did they compromise well? I think we predicted that the twisty section would string people out into the overtaking zones, and I felt like it did to an extent. George Russell suggested removing that twisty bit, the go-kart bit, as you call it, Matt, and just making that into a turn. I think I would agree with that. I think they've fallen into the trap of a lot of temporary layouts where they say we need something intricate and technical so that it isn't just a couple of turns and some big long straights. And I think like every street track, if it doesn't have a big long straight where they can overtake with DRS, there's not much else to it. So I wasn't impressed with the track at all. Am I being too grumpy about the layout, Brad?
Maybe some of the enjoyment I had was from seeing how difficult drivers were finding, and some of the mistakes they were making, because it felt like everyone was just a half a meter braking point away from walking the car to the barrier. It just didn't happen that often in the race. Bottas made it to the wall, but there wasn't really a whole lot else. I was convinced. I tweeted before the race that. And I was pretty confident someone was going to go in the wall on the exit of the final corner before the really, really long back straight after the twiddly bit. And apart from a couple of minor brushes, I don't think anyone did, but I really thought in the heat of battle someone would push too hard, clatter the wall. I mean, it's a testament to how well the drivers drove, to be honest, because you had a lot of marbles, you had kind of fine, gritty gravel, you had very low grip offline. And actually, even when racing, the vast majority of the time, people manage to keep it out of the barrier. But I thought it would be very easy for that not to have been the case, and for us to have had a maybe slightly messy, but maybe very interesting and strategic multiple safety car race, or at least, more yellow flags and stuff. And I saw people battling. There were cars side by side with other cars going for moves, occasionally bouncing off each other, but there was racing. It wasn't a procession, even if it wasn't particularly exciting, because the race for the lead was quite well settled.
If I say it's my favourite temporary track or my favourite street circuit, I mean, that again, it's a low bar, but given that that's their constraint that they're working with, it's probably now my favourite. It's the street circuit I dislike the most. No, dislike the least. That's the one. So I suppose that's a pretty good bar to be on. I'd like it though, Brad, if you could explain marbles a little bit. Why was it a particular issue here?
Well, marbles are always an issue on any track, but in particular on street circuits, because you've got walls that are kind of preventing the little rubber marble from the tyres from being thrown too far from the track. So in general, they tend to stay in more of a close proximity to the racing surface because they bounce off the walls and come back. They can't go very far. But we had the added problem here that the track surface, for reasons that Matt can probably fill us in on, was breaking up a little bit. Didn't have the same integrity that some other asphalt surfaces have, particularly at the beginning of the weekend. So a kind of fine, gritty gravel was being spread away from the racing line, which I'm sure they periodically cleaned up. But it just meant that there was more kind of gritty, not very grippy detritus off the racing line, because obviously you're cleaning the racing line all the time. And so when drivers went slightly wide or tried a slightly different line or were in a position to overtake someone, you're having to drive on that stuff. You're having to drive on that dirty, marbly, slippery area. And it was just really making it difficult to confidently go for those moves or to vary your lines. But yeah, on a street track, it's always a bit more of a problem.
So fix it. How do we fix it?
Well, they did try and fix the asphalt in places. So I think Matt was saying to me just before the show that someone had spilled some hydraulic fluid on the track surface, I think maybe prior to the weekend, and in the pressure washing, or during the weekend maybe. Yeah, so maybe a track work vehicle. One of the cleaning machines. Yeah. So that's ironic. So one of the machines out there trying to clean the surface has thrown a load of fluid down, which then damaged the surface, which is then made it easier to break apart. But yeah, how to fix it? Maybe slightly different asphalt, or maybe lay the asphalt earlier so that you're not worried about all the resin still being there when Formula One descends.
Okay. Look, and this was slightly my concern that, was the track completely ready to go? I mean, broadly, it's put on an event. The concern I have for F1's general health is the same one I have for Monaco. Monaco is one of the most hyped, and it's one of the most advertised, and therefore brings in the most amount of new viewers. Then they watch Monaco and go, oh, is that F1, is it? Miami was massively, massively hyped. So therefore, you've got to deliver something. I would like to see that amount of hype go into Silverstone, and then the new people finding it, see F1 on a racetrack and see what F1 is all about. This race risked being a procession. It was saved a little bit by the late safety car, but that could have been kind of bad PR for F1. But I'm just a bloke in a shed. That's the F1 PR department's problem. But yeah, so look, it survived. The track this survived, so I don't think we need to go too much more into that. What we will go into next, I think, is Mercedes was the next team on the call sheet here for us. But I think we can lead into that with the safety car, because the safety car in the end didn't really affect the front battle. We've covered that Verstappen was able to win that and stay ahead. Great start on the restart, by the way, to just get away completely cleanly. Showed Leclerc a clean set of heels from the safety car, and then Perez just wasn't armed to take the battle to Sainz in the end. But it did affect people down the midfield, Matt. So from a tactical point of view, this safety car was very interesting.
Well, it was, because we had some people. I'm going to say the name Russell.
Yep.
I'm going to say the name Ocon, and Interestingly enough, both Vettel and Stroll, who for different reasons failed to benefit fully from it, all starting out of position. Ocon, obviously no qualifying at the back. Vettel and Stroll, they had a fuel temperature problem, which benefited Alonso at the start because he had some clean grid spots to drive forward into that not all the drivers did, which is why he was up driving into the back of Hamilton at the start. And once we got to the first round of pit stops for everyone on the medium tire, there was sort of this pause. And then Russell came on the radio and the team said, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, I'm on the hard tires. They're running representative lap times. I think we stay out and see if we get a safety car or a virtual safety car. And lo and behold, our friend Lando Norris slightly misjudges the situation with Gasly, and here comes the virtual safety car. And so those people who had run deep into the race without pitting had gained a bucket full of places. I think Ocon had gained 10, he'd gained about 10. So, and Vettel and Stroll were in that same position, except for various reasons.
Hang on, whose fault did you say that argument was? That collision was?
Vettel and Schumacher?
No,
or Stroll and Magnussen?
You were talking Gasly and, didn't you mention Gasly and Norris?
And Norris, yeah.
You're blaming Norris. Right, time to play game. Whose fault is it? Okay, so this caused the safety car. That kind of slid by under the radar, you saying that. You're blaming Norris for that.
Actually, I have to be technically correct here. Alonso hitting Gasly started the events that caused the safety car when Norris hit Gasly. But yes, in the Norris-Gasly collision, I think it's totally on Norris. You have Gasly who was running in the top 10 and suddenly he's down at P16 or whatever. And you're going around him and you're like, oh, I see him looking in the mirrors. He must be racing me after he dropped 10 straight positions in half a lap. And I'm thinking, well, no, that's not really the case. He's probably just trying to get to the pits without hitting anybody.
Which he failed spectacularly to do because he did hit Norris. So when this first happened, obviously, I wanted to get a gauge on whose fault it was because I had a small suspicion that this might feature in this part of the show. And it looked pretty clear to me that Gasly just wandered into the path of Norris. If you are the slower car, so first of all, to address Matt's points about this being Norris's fault, Norris isn't looking at Gasly's position. Norris is driving his own race. He's not looking at a specific ticker showing Gasly dropping down through the field. He's just driving the race that's in front of him. And Gasly, it's on him. If he's got a slowing, injured race car, it's on him to stay the heck out of everyone's way. And he just failed to do that in that particular point. It wasn't huge. He didn't swerve across the track, but he wandered to the left in a place where obviously cars were going past him on his left. And so Gasly failed to stay safely out of the way and caused that accident. And it was bizarre because out of all the crashes we could have had this weekend, I don't know, we had a couple in earlier in the weekend, but in the race, of all the accidents that could have happened with drivers smashing into walls and, making a mistake, there's none of that Latifi just losing control and hitting a barrier. We didn't have any of that. We had a really clumsy, unnecessary contact on the track when both cars were facing the same direction, and it was nothing to do with the barriers. It was just Gasly wandering across the track.
It was pretty much on a straight. I've got some sympathy with what Matt was saying, because at first I went, well, why did Norris take such a kind of a tight line, and like he wasn't really needing to fight him until I went onto the Gasly onboard, and Gasly's like talking. You don't know if these radio messages are in sync, but you hear him going, well, I can't turn. But then coming out of the corner just before the collision, you see him like put a lot of power down, and he's trying to get to the pits, but he's put a lot of power down and kind of basically washed out. So it seemed kind of unnecessary. You're limping home, get over to the right, stick your hazards on.
We've already spoken about why Norris wouldn't have wanted to go miles offline.
Yeah.
It's dirty, and there's no need to, because as long as Gasly stays safely to one side, Norris did compromise his line. He did drive round him. It's just that they met in the middle because Gasly wandered unpredictably into his path.
I agree with everything you say, except for Gasly was driving an obviously wounded car, and Norris just didn't quite give him enough berth when push came to shove. I mean, I mean, that's just a disagreement we're probably never going to get over.
It wasn't so wounded that he couldn't just stay to the right. He'd managed to navigate the previous corners.
He
just needed to apply a little bit more
to the right
lock.
I would say. There was more room to Norris's left than to Gasly's right.
Ooh, now we'll need a still frame of that. So feedback at missedapex.net, because I think that is one where you would have to get go to your local lawn green bowls club and borrow their little tape measure, because I think that's what we'd have to do there. I didn't realise it was quite related to the Alonso dive bomb. Yep. So is that probably what caused the damage to Gasly that stopped him being able to turn? But this is a bit of in-car radio politics that Alonso did. I'm sure you'll appreciate, Brad, because Missed Apex karting event, yeah? So I'm comparing my karting thing that happened to me specifically to F1 drivers. It's basically the same. But one of our listeners, I was up the inside of him into a right-hander. I think he's not seen me. I could, if I back out, that's fine, but I could stay where I am. He's not seen me, so if I stay here, he's definitely going to turn in and hit me, but it'll be his fault, kinda, but I'm the only one who could have stopped the accident. Whilst I was thinking all that, I stayed exactly there. He cut across me. He ended up spinning. I hit him, and then I hit him again trying to get past. My immediate reaction, and sorry about that, other Brad at the karting, sorry for hitting you twice, was to play to the marshals immediately. And I think you taught me this, Brad, that if you're at a kart track and you're in your own race suit and the other guy's in a rental suit, you have to gesticulate and look fed up. Like, what an idiot. I can't believe he's done that. And then the marshals will tend to favour you. And I think Alonso uses that in a way because he's a two-time world champion. He's a veteran of the sport and he was fully playing to the stewards, but it didn't work this time.
Yeah, so I actually don't remember this specific incident with Alonso on Gasly. I'm sure I saw it, but quite a lot of stuff then happened immediately afterwards. So it hasn't stayed logged in my mind. So Matt might have to describe it.
I think it was coming into turn one, possibly on a safety car restart or before, in lap 39. He had the DRS run on Gasly and had been trying to get around him. He came up the inside, but from really far behind. And my impression, if I was Alonso, is he thought Gasly was leaving. Gasly knew he was there and was leaving him room. And then he started to turn and Alonso realized, oh, he doesn't know I'm there or he's going to close the door. Alonso locks up and just absolutely tags the right rear of Gasly's car. Maybe I have it backwards. I don't know.
So it's actually,
how long ago was this race?
It's actually very similar if you want to compare it to the Magnussen-Stroll incident later in the race, Brad. So we can play that as a whose fault it is. We will get to Mercedes in a second. But Magnussen was on the inside of Stroll. And it kind of looked on the surface like maybe it was another Stroll not checking his mirrors thing. But basically, Magnussen went for a move up the inside. Stroll just didn't react to it and probably rightly turned and went for the apex. Magnussen suddenly realised he wasn't going to make it and just washes out and collects Stroll.
So the Magnussen-Stroll one, just so I'm getting this correct, that was a different corner and it was a left-hander. Is that right?
Yes,
because
that's
there
right.
was
that's
another Haas on. We've got a lot of whose fault is it?
Yeah.
There was another Haas on Aston Martin, which was Schumacher on Vettel
on the right-hander,
which was at turn one, which is how I'm picturing the Alonso-Gasly crash. So anyway, there was quite a lot of this. Drivers going for a move up the inside and the driver on the outside turning towards the apex like they weren't there. And I don't know whether maybe some of that was because the driver on the outside didn't want to compromise their line and go slightly wider because it's so dirty and then they'd really go wide. Whereas on an ordinary track, maybe they would just give that bit of space so both cars can survive. But there were several incidents, and it sounds like these are three of them we're talking about now, where the only person who could have avoided contact at the point of contact was the car on the outside turning in. All they needed to do was leave that car width. Just don't go all the way to the apex. Leave enough room for Alonso or Schumacher or Magnussen to exist. But they didn't. In every instance, they tried to take an apex and they guaranteed a crash.
Was it in one of the practice sessions where Perez did like a practice overtake on Sainz and just locked up and shot off the track? I'm wondering if this is a track where, like we said, because you go offline and there's a lot of marbles offline, if you go up the inside and then that move is no longer on, it's very hard to abort because you've already kind of committed. And we saw Perez trying to overtake Sainz after the safety car as well, and he actually completely overshot. You felt like he didn't actually need to brake that late to get the move done.
Well, yeah, I remember we were very fortunate on F1 TV to have John Watson commentating. And he did mention that it was a track that featured a lot of trail braking. And when you're braking and turning with a tire at the same time, you're usually very, very close to using 100% of its available grip. And then add a slightly slippery surface to that, and you're going to see some of the stuff like what we saw today.
So I guess we probably don't have time to go into detail in all of those situations of all those crashes we've spoken
generally,
about.
Yeah.
But one thing I just wanted to point out just to head this this fault finder off at the pass, because I know some people use this as a way to assign blame.
Mm-hmm.
In each of these examples, or certainly some of them, the overtaking driver, the driver on the inside, locked a wheel. And I've heard even the stewards use that as an excuse to penalise that driver, saying, well, they locked up, so they were out of control. But that really isn't the case. The lockups that you see in that situation are almost always, and certainly today, the driver on the inside thinking, oh, wow, they're going to just turn in on me.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and avoid contact. And they're applying additional braking pressure that they wouldn't have done in the move normally if that outside car, the turning in car, was looking like they were going to leave enough room. So they the attacking car just jams the brakes on at the last minute to try and avoid contact. And in that situation, it seems like they're the only one attempting to avoid contact. So I think it's a bit unfair to then use that lockup, that puff of tyre smoke, as a way of saying, well, you were out of control because you locked up. Because it's not really that way around.
And I wonder if there are different tracks where in that same scenario, you would have a little bit more grip and you'd have a bit more braking grip to get out of that situation. So you could make the move and go, it's not going to happen. So I'll apply more brake and let the car in front have the apex. And perhaps this was a track where, I mean, we saw a lot of drivers do it, and these are some of the best drivers in the world. So maybe it was a track circumstance. We should get to Mercedes, because there was a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, the dynamic between George Russell in the team and Lewis Hamilton in the team, I think we got some more clues and some more peeks behind the curtain. I think the first thing to say is that George Russell certainly earned that fifth place, very decisive on what he wanted to do. And I think it's also fair to say that he managed the hard tyre well and was able to take advantage of a gamble. And it is a gamble, because had there not been a safety car, he might have finished a couple of places behind where he might ordinarily have done on a normal pit strategy. But he made that call. And I think George Russell at this point, you could probably say he's a more seasoned midfield driver than his more experienced teammate, because those are the sort of coin flip, Jensen Button on intermediate type calls that you're used to making in the midfield to go and get points, to go and get a cheeky podium. So I don't know, Brad, like when those situations come in, he's so tuned into, I know what could maximize my result. I know what gamble to take.
So maybe, but I don't think that's the case today. So I think a lot of people are going to heap a ton of praise on Russell for taking charge of his strategy and making that call, which won him the fifth place. And Russell obviously did a great job. You know, he did exactly what he needed to do today to get that position. But in reality, when you're out in kind of no man's land, lapping on decent lap times on your hard tires, it was the only sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, when Russell suggested that to the team, I'm sure the team had already decided that, because they immediately said a firm. It wasn't like they had to think about it and go, oh, actually, George, what a brilliant idea. Let me just chuck that back to the strategy team and see what they think. It was just a no-brainer. So Russell didn't come up with some amazing strategy there. It was the clear and obvious strategy that anyone would do. Hamilton would have done that same thing in that same situation, I'm sure.
There was nothing to lose from that point. So it's very different. If you had that same situation, but you were deep in a podium battle, first, second, and third, that would have been a harder call to make.
Exactly. And then obviously the situation that transpired with the timing of the safety car, once again, similar to Australia, clearly then didn't benefit Hamilton. And they did have a decision to make, because they had the option of pitting for softs. And I don't know, Matt, we spoke earlier. I don't know whether they had mediums to go for. Maybe they thought softs were fine because there's not that many laps left, 14 laps or so. But they were almost certainly going to lose track position to Russell. Although I've seen some tweets during the show where people are suggesting that actually they probably could, if they'd reacted soon enough, they could have probably pitted Hamilton and he would have been out ahead of Russell on those softs. They were used softs because Hamilton obviously went all the way through to Q3, so he didn't have any brand new softs remaining, but they would have been pretty fresh. But anyway, they could have pitted him and potentially lost track position to George, or they could have stayed out and not lost track position, but you have a hard charging, fresh medium tyre shod George Russell behind. I really feel like unless we're wrong and they could have got him out in front of Russell, he was really between a rock and a hard place. From that point onwards, there was no way in my mind that Hamilton was ever finishing in front of Russell, regardless of what strategy call they made.
So to run through the same points, I think Russell was running in 5th place when the incident happened.
Yeah,
And
without a stop, yeah.
If you recall me mentioning how tight the race was, I think if he pitted, he did come out between maybe 13th, 14th, 15th place. If he pitted when they said, do you want to pit? He was going to lose enough places that he might have been lucky to get back to a single point at the end of the race. So that, I think, was a very easy decision. And all the runners who had gained points positions made the same decision there. With regards to Hamilton, he just got done wrong by the racing gods, in my opinion, because Russell came out behind him, was ahead of him, came out behind him. So I don't know how at that point, if he pitted it on the same time as Russell did, he's not going to get out ahead of Russell. He's still going to be behind him. The only way he could get position on Russell was to stay out while Russell came in. And the decision then is, do I take the track position or do I lose a position and hope that I can overtake him in the minimum amount of laps left?
Well, I think the idea also is like he could have come out on softs. I guess that would have been the other option. Brad?
So I've had some screenshots sent to me showing that at the time, during that whole virtual safety car period, it was about a 12-second gap that Hamilton had once Russell had made his stop and he'd come out behind, having a beneficial stop under those conditions, losing less relative time to the other cars. There was a 12-second gap, but I think that 12 seconds not enough, even under virtual safety car, for Hamilton to have got back in and still maintained that position. So I think he was always coming out behind Russell.
Yeah, so I think obviously Russell's had a rub of the green there, and they've gone for that, and they've got it. So you miss all the shots you don't take. So not taking anything away from Russell at all. The fact that has stuck in my craw has been the dynamic between the team and Lewis Hamilton and the way Hamilton has reacted to that. So you have to go back a little bit, but we've seen Hamilton disappear when he's had a midfield car before. It's not that he's not a good driver. It's, how much do you want it in those positions? How much are you adapted to racing in those positions? How much can you deal with? And I'm sure, Brad, you can relate to this. It's a different energy fighting for the lead than it is scrapping for 7th or 8th place. And I've heard you in tournaments say, it didn't feel great, battling for 10th position or whatever. But the dynamic when they had the decision to make of the team saying, do you want to come in? And at this point, Hamilton's head's already down. To my mind, you can only control what you control. And he's had 2 safety cars that have put his younger teammate ahead of him, which can't feel great, but that's nothing you did. As Matt said, that is the racing gods. They've bestowed that. He then comes on and says, well, you shouldn't ask me. You're the ones who know. But that's not really how it's worked out for the strategists at Mercedes. When they've made a decision that hasn't worked out, Hamilton has been pretty severe on the radio. Like, oh, we shouldn't have done that, man. We shouldn't have done that. And that becomes kind of a management issue. I'm a Hamilton fan. Please don't shoot me. But that becomes a management issue, Brad, where perhaps his less prestigious teammates in the strategy department feel like, if I get this wrong, I'm going to get a kicking. And that makes them want to throw the decision to Hamilton to check he'll be happy. And then he's turned around and said, well, don't ask me. This is your job.
So I understand what you're saying. The way I see it, Hamilton has dug Mercedes out of many a poor strategy hole.
Sure.
And they have relied on him in the past when the car has been more competitive to basically get them back to a position that they shouldn't have ever had to get back to. And there have been a number of times where he has probably felt like his trust in the strategy team has been misplaced. And so I can understand him getting frustrated with them. But that does then confuse the situation when you have a situation like today where they're asking him for his input, and in his mind, and I think today justifiably in his mind, he's saying, well, I don't have all the information for that. He doesn't have the big picture in that situation today to be able to say, yes, okay, yeah, softs now, because he doesn't know how many positions he's going to lose. He doesn't know that. Russell's earlier strategy call or conversation was a much simpler thing. When this safety car came out, it's obviously unexpected. Hamilton doesn't immediately know all the relative gaps, how the race is going to play out. He does need the team in that situation to just tell him. And I think if they told him consistently how it was, instead of trying to lean on him so much, if they just told him and got it right, then he would build trust in them and we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think the problem is when they have in the past told him, do this, Lewis, quite often it's been wrong. So I can't blame him for not quite trusting them, but also in this situation, needing them,
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a tricky situation.
And it didn't sound like a confident pit wall, did it? That's in some of the other teams, they just say, this is what's happening, but they don't have someone with as much clout as Hamilton to deal with.
Yeah. So at the end, so when the decision was made, they said, well, we advise staying out. But if they'd led with that, if they'd come on the radio and said, Lewis, here's the situation. We can either do this and this will happen, or this and this will happen. What do you want to do? At least he could have then made an informed decision. As it happened, from what we heard, they asked him quite an ambiguous question. What do you reckon? And it either needs to be give him all the information and then let him choose, or make the decision for him and don't kind of beat around the bush. Do it, be decisive, and work that strategy. You've got a whole team of strategists. You're paying lots of people to make these decisions. And it feels like sometimes Mercedes don't even have a strategy department. It's like it is one guy with a notepad.
Gosh.
It's simple. They asked him the wrong question. And they should have said, Lewis, do you want to come in for fresh tires, but you'll lose a position to Russell? Or do you want to stay out on old tires and defend, because that's where we are right now? Because I think that's his decision to make. Strategist doesn't know which one he's going to prefer because he's an experienced 7-time world champion. But they didn't ask him that question, did they? They were just like, you want to come in or not? And he's like, how should I know? I want the magic strategy that gets me fresh tires and keeps me in front of Russell. You're not telling me what's going to happen if I do either thing. And I think he was kind of right to be a little bit miffed that they were, to me, blasé about hitting him up for that decision without giving him, as Brad says, the correct information. Pit delta's 18 seconds. It's you've got 12 seconds on Russell. If we give you fresh tires, you're going to have to pass him. Which do you want? And as soon as he knew that, he said, I don't want to give up position. They're like, beautiful. That's kind of what we think anyway, so stay out.
Okay, so you're both being quite sort of pro Hamilton there. The thing that stopped me being pro Hamilton in this situation was then in the pen, in the interviews, he then continued with that same line. And I think it doesn't show a great relationship between him and the pit wall. And I would wish for that to be better. But also bear in mind, we are playing armchair strategist. We're enjoying doing that. And if you're in a team screaming at us because we're so wrong and naive, that's completely fine. We are water cooler pundits. But do feel free to get in touch. Spanners@missedapex.net, Matt@missedapex.net, or feedback@missedapex.net. Brad, last point on this?
I think all I was going to say was just in response to your last point was that maybe the relationship between Hamilton and his strategy department at Mercedes may already have been less good. We might have already got to this point had he not managed to salvage particular results in the past that might have gone missing. Although having said that, plenty of them he didn't manage to salvage. I'm sure I can remember a Monaco that was thrown away through Mercedes ineptitude in the strategy department. I'm going to just say
it's
it's happened enough times.
2015, I think, is the one that you're probably going to point to. 2015, where Rosberg ended up in front of him, and he wasn't very happy, and that was on a call, on a pit wall call, I think. Couple of positive things before we go into the awards, Matt. Ocon and Albon, probably the standouts of the midfield.
Yes, well, if we're going to call Mercedes not a midfield team, we'll ignore Russell and we'll say that our friend Ocon, and I'm not that I'm anti-Alonso, but he did start at the very, very back, and he did drive all the way to 8th position, mainly by doing what Russell did, which is just staying out forever on the hard tire, getting the benefit of the lucky, or perhaps inevitable, given the circuit, virtual safety car coming in. They put him on the soft tire, which went all the way to the end. But interestingly, he was kind of stuck behind Schumacher in a battle with them, had a really good move. Schumacher defended hard, and Vettel came by, and this is one of my favorite instances. And so now he's actually lost a position, chases him down the straight, and then watches Vettel turn into Schumacher and take the both of themselves out. And I can only imagine the look on his face as he just went through the corner and
Freebies,
said,
man.
"Oh, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I certainly appreciate that."
Yeah, and nothing better than freebies. But Ocon looked very positive all throughout the weekend, even after the qualifying incident. The practice incident, which he put down to himself. I heard him saying, like, that's not the kind of mistake I usually make, but it's a bit of an error-generating track. So but he just held his hand up and just said, I made that mistake, and then got his head down. And I guess maybe not being in Parc Fermé let them do the odd thing as well. But yeah, really good performance.
Yeah, I mean, there was some drama late when they wanted him to slow down and back up Albon, so that Alonso wouldn't lose a place to him, because Alonso was already driving around with a 5-second penalty.
Yeah.
And he was immediately not in favor of this, thinking he'd get overtaken. And so his engineer, they talked a bit, and then eventually he goes, "Well, how many laps are left?" And they were like, 3. He's like, "Okay, we'll see what we can do." But it was all for nothing, because as we've discovered while the show's been recording, Alonso picked up another 5-second penalty. So that means that Albon actually went all the way to P9 from P18 and has picked up 2 more points for Williams.
Okay, so hang on a minute. What did Alonso get the penalties for? Hitting Gasly, even though he tried to protest and be political. What was the other penalty for?
Going off track and gaining an advantage, for which he was investigated twice and apparently penalized once.
Ah, that's interesting. So actually, I wanted to talk about that with you as well, Brad. What did you think of handing the place back? But then, so Russell had to hand the place back. They decided, and this wouldn't have been like a protest from Hamilton or anything, but basically, if they didn't get Russell to swap back positions with Hamilton, they risked race control giving Russell a penalty for overtaking off track. So they decided to do that. Russell puts himself in the DRS zone and then immediately overtakes. Not a problem between teammates, but that kind of thing could end up happening for the lead at some point. What do we think? Should there be more of a penalty than being allowed to just plonk yourself back in the DRS?
I'm slightly on the fence with that one. I think in this situation, it was pretty clear that Mercedes should have probably ordered that swap back much earlier.
Sooner, yeah.
Rather, I mean, it ultimately didn't matter. Russell wasn't going to gain another position, but in another situation, maybe he would have, because I think he was catching Perez at that point. Once he was, he got past Hamilton, and then kind of drove away for a bit. And I was thinking all the time, well, I mean, if race control decide to independently look into this and say that wasn't on, they could just be getting a needless penalty here, where if they just immediately said, "Oh, George, we've got the potential to pick up a penalty here, just swap back, you're going to immediately get Lewis back again anyway," that seemed like a more sensible thing to do. I thought the most surprising thing was how long they left it. So, but yeah, it can happen for the lead. We've seen in the past, a long time ago, Hamilton losing out to, was it Raikkonen at Spa?
Massa.
2000?
Wasn't it Massa?
No, Massa went on to benefit from
right.
Hamilton not allowing Raikkonen back through enough. And that was, at least, he let him fully through. He just immediately repassed him, but it was deemed that it was too soon. But anyway.
2008.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Listen to us old sweats harking back to races 15 years ago. I think that brings us to the awards. No, in fact, everything that is left in my notes can be attributed to an award. And unless Matt has something else to say, I'm going to press the podium button. Champagne! Max Verstappen stamping his authority on the 2022 season, looking every bit the contender for the 2022 championship. I nearly said maintaining his championship. I nearly accidentally said claiming his first world championship. All those things are in the past. He is world champion, and he could be world champion again. To my eyes, it is theirs to lose now, and the others have to do something drastic to catch up with Red Bull and Max Verstappen, who just seem to have everything in the right spots. Ferrari have the potential, but they're not doing the things. They're not doing all the things all the time. They're doing some of the things great, but Red Bull and Verstappen are doing all the things good all the time, except when they suddenly don't. But they've not broken down for several races now, so Ferrari cannot rely on the tactic of just waiting for Red Bull to fall down. But this is the part of the show where we give out some awards. A good thing, a bad thing, and then we'll get on out of here because it's 1 o'clock. You still awake, Brad?
Just about.
I just noticed your eyes drooping a little bit there.
Yeah, and I have a very, very early start on track testing tyres as well. So
okay, don't tell your bosses. It's at Bradley Philpot on Twitter.
That's correct.
Yep.
And you can also search for Brad Philpot on YouTube if you like to see videos of me driving stuff fast or teaching people how to drive stuff fast.
Yeah, there we go. And we'll go to you first then for the awards, Brad. What was your thing of the weekend?
So a good thing award is probably quite an easy one to go for, but it's America embracing Formula One in a way that I never thought would ever happen. I went to a NASCAR race. I went to the Daytona 500 in 1995. I went to Daytona 500 in 1997. Both of those times, none of the fans in the grandstand that I spoke to had the first idea what Formula One was. They didn't have the foggiest idea what this thing was I was trying to talk to them about. But now I don't think that's the case. I think pretty much everybody that watches TV will know that F1 exists at least, and lots of people will know a lot about Formula One. So
yeah.
America embracing it.
A rising tide raises all ships, and it might be a little bit jarring to some of the old sweats in Europe to have such a big influx all at once. But as I said to the New York Post, Matt, in an interview that I did with them, go and read what I said there. In 9 months, in a year, 2 years, all those new fans will know 90%. 95% of what all the current old fans know. So there's no point being all snobby about it. We've got a big influx of fans. Let's be welcoming because they are us. Before you know it, they know all the stuff we know. So there's no point us being precious.
That's an old Pogo comic. We have met the enemy and they are us. And yes, in fact, you were absolutely right. And I had no idea you'd been interviewed by the New York Post. You hardly mentioned it at all.
It's kind of a big deal. I was telling
it's
everyone.
It's a huge deal, man.
I was so pleased. So thank you very much to them for talking to me. But Matt, you are at MattPT55 on Twitter, at MattPT55. Email Matt. Say hello to him. He likes emails. Matt@missedapex.net. You picking up those emails okay?
Yes, I am, in fact, and occasionally replying to them. But even if I don't, please know that I do read every last one of them. But I don't have a convenient like button like I do on Twitter to let you know.
And same. And we're getting better. We did a mailbag episode in the week, which I really enjoyed. So we are sorting.
I like that, actually.
Yeah, we're sorting our mail out. We are getting better at responding to that feedback. And all the links to everything we mentioned is in the show notes below because Matt sorts all that out for us. But Matt, what is your thing of the weekend?
You know... Don't hate me. I'd like to say Ocon. I like to say, Albon getting those points for Williams is brilliant. But you know, if I think about the race, what was really exciting at the start was watching Hamilton fight his way back to the positions he lost.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that's the Hamilton that everybody shows up to see. And it was nice to see him near the front of the race driving like that.
See, I don't know. I don't want to argue it too much, but even then, to me, it was head down. It was, I've got damage. The car's not working, and he's just having to be constantly talked down by the pit wall, and I'm not enjoying seeing Hamilton in the midfield. I don't think he's got a good mindset for driving in the midfield. You know, he's a winner. My thing of the weekend is going to be to Russell, who I think is responding to that challenge mentally better, and just from an approach, the approach is better, and whether or not he's actually performing better than Hamilton, I think that's still up in the air. I think essentially both Mercedes drivers are doing a solid job, but they're not in they're in a kind of position where little things can make a huge difference. You know, in the midfield, things can go slightly your way or against, and you can be 6th or you can be 16th, as we saw at Imola. And we've seen 2 races where Hamilton ended up on top of Russell, but for a safety car. Was Hamilton significantly better than Russell? I don't know. I don't think it has been massive. Both drivers have been doing a solid job, but I think Russell's taking it more in his stride at the moment.
And not wanting to just jump into your
no, that's
the
of
weekend
course.
And bad thing.
Yeah.
I checked through the results just for like a sanity check. I checked through the season's results because everything that I was reading on social media would have had you believe that Russell was dominating Hamilton this season. Certainly the way some of the pundits on Sky Sports have been putting it. You could be forgiven for thinking that Russell was just absolutely kicking Hamilton's butt. But if you actually look at the reality of it, their performances are very similar in terms of speed. Hamilton has been ahead out of the 5 qualifying sessions. He's been ahead 3 times. In the races, he's only been ahead once, but 2 times he's had a position where he would have been ahead, taken away by a safety car. So in reality, it would have been 3-2 in qualifying, 3-2 in the race in Hamilton's favour. In terms of all the practice sessions, Russell would have been ahead 2 more times in practice sessions than Hamilton, but they don't really count, and they've been experimenting. So it's certainly not been a whitewash, and I think we'll probably see that proportion continue for the rest of the season.
Since it's my happy thing, I like to end up by pointing out that we just may not be in a car where we can see much of a difference between Russell and Hamilton, which, not to take away from my boy Sainz at all, but certainly last season, Sainz beat Leclerc in the same car. Now they have a car that's potentially the fastest one on the circuit, and we're seeing a little bit of a gap.
So to put that maybe a different way, there's more variables in a 2022 Mercedes and in a 2021 Ferrari. There's more variables and more different directions. So it is harder to tease out who's doing better. But my good thing of the weekend was actually going to go to Russell a little bit cumulatively. Obviously, we've praised Verstappen a lot, but cumulatively, Russell has done what he is expected to do, and he's done well in the races, and it's hard to fault him. And the fact that we're even talking 3-2 against Lewis Hamilton, I think if you're a Russell fan, you'd have taken that at the beginning of the season. So a very, very impressive start. So, the other good thing award I was going to go to is whoever positions the interviews, because they seem to always strategically put it that when Sainz is being interviewed, the wind is gently blowing into his hair and picking it up and lifting it away. Never once does it come from the side or the back. No, always perfectly in front, like a Hollywood movie.
And occasionally putting a shirt on.
Yeah, that's some good direction there. All right, it's the Missed Apex Award, which is a bad thing.
Oh no, you missed the apex.
Who missed the apex for you, Brad?
So some people are going to really disagree with me here, because I've seen some people enjoy this on Twitter, but I thought the Martin Brundle grid walk was unnecessarily cringe. I appreciate he's being fed the names of people in his ear. I wouldn't know basketball players' names or baseball players or whoever he happened to come across on the grid, but I think he got quite a lot wrong today, and I actually felt like he was almost deliberately rude at times, but unaware of it. I don't know. It was the interview with the Williams sisters, where he kind of just left the microphone in front of their face, and they were like, it was a real awkward pause. And anyway, I feel like that segment is, I was getting in trouble from Rebecca, my fiance, for having
That's
that
really
on.
funny.
She wanted me to just turn it off.
I kept muting it, but it's a clash of worlds, isn't it? Where in the F1 world, Martin Brundle is a megastar, and him walking around the grid is a big deal. And so, if you've been invited to the paddock and you're an F1 fan, and Martin Brundle wants to talk to you, that's like, wow, that's amazing. That's Martin Brundle. But if you're some big Hollywood star who's not really into F1, you don't know who this middle-aged Brit is shoving a microphone in your face. So it does feel like he needs like a runner to go up to head of these people and go, Martin Brundle's about to interview you. He's like one of the best known British F1 broadcasters of all time and a pretty good F1 driver in his own right. So maybe you want to like at least make pretend. But they didn't give him any of that help. So I think he doesn't have the help that he needs to make that work.
I feel like until they do that, or until they set these interviews up in advance in some way, it's going to end up looking unprofessional and a mess and rub people up the wrong way when it's just unnecessary. It doesn't need to be like that. So that's my missed apex.
Okay, Matt, who gets the missed apex award for you?
Now, I don't want people to take this the wrong way. Just because I like Ocon doesn't mean I hate Alonso, but oh my goodness, did he ever miss the apex? He had a fast car. He was in the points. He got a great start, and he just pitched it all out the window.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he did it in the most Alonso of ways as well, didn't he?
Indeed. It was entertaining to watch him do it. I will hand that to you. It added much to the joy of watching the race. But oh wow, that was a double points finish for Alpine that was just chucked away.
And I'm going to give my missed apex award to the thing that triggered me the most. And maybe we should make this a segment. What triggered Spanners most during the broadcast was when they cut to the people mid-race who were in the pool enjoying a pool party, and there was a lot of people in the pool. And like, at least watch the race. You've had a whole weekend to be in the pool. You may as well just come to my house and just spit in my face and just poke me in the eyes, because that was galling to see that just at least watch the race. That got my missed apex award. Also, I wanted to give Bottas the good thing award for consistency and consistently being up there. The Bottas Alfa Romeo package is doing really well, but then I guess we have to give him the missed apex for, I guess, kind of slightly stuffing it after the safety car restart as well. That's brilliant, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope we've done all right here as it sails past 1 a.m. in the morning. Well done to Brad Philpot for staying awake. Go and follow him on Twitter and on YouTube. Links in the show notes below. Of course, follow Matt to Trumpets. And follow me too. Why not? I'm the best one at Spanners Ready. And the show is at Missed Apex. And we've got a Facebook group as well. Or you could be a patron and support us and join our patron Slack forum. It's like an app. It's like lots of WhatsApp channels all in the same app. And there's some extra content as well. So on Tuesday, Matt and I will do the doom scrolling Missed Apex podcast, where we mix in some non-F1 stuff as well. It's a chill stream and a very relaxed podcast. It's not like a paywall for better content. If you support us, we'll give you some extra not as good content. Until next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. I'm struggling. I got to the end though.